Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So today on the channel, I have with me a special guest, and you probably remember him from if you saw the last video, and it's not other than Abda, one of the co-founders of Intuitum. And Abda, I want to thank you once more for making the time to meet with me today. And if you haven't seen the last video, just a quick recap, we are discussing CISO Assistant. So CISO Assistant is your one-stop GRC tool, and Abda is joining me for a few sessions just to kind of go over what CISO Assistant is about and how you could use it in your security operations in terms of GRC. So in our last video, Abda shared a high overview of CISO Assistant and what it does. So today he's gonna go in more in depth with some of the modules for you to, easily get started with using a tool such like this in your environment. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand it over to you, Abda.
Thanks, Josh, again for having me. As you mentioned, we will base the discussion on the fact that you saw the first video that gives you this overview. For the sake of clarity, and given that there are multiple features, sometimes it could become overwhelming. And what we discussed with Josh is that we're gonna just pick the typical ways of starting your journey with CISO Assistant while keeping in mind that it's intended as a one-stop shop platform where all those modules interact with each other because let's be honest, whenever you're doing cybersecurity program, it's not about one feature or one modules. There is this kind of need for communication between different parts of the applications, and you need to have this kind of systemic approach to your program. But you need to start somewhere, and this is the whole purpose of this video, is that I'm going to highlight some of the typical ways of doing that. One thing that was a good inspiration for us when we started designing the application is next to this hyper-convergence approach, we need to start with the basics. And a good inspiration was the EBIOS RM. It's a methodology or kind of framework that is designed by the French authorities. And even if you're not familiar with it and you're not intending to use it, I highly recommend that you take a look on the English version or the French one if you're fluent with that, and just learn about the vision of the approach. You don't need to stick with it, but it's just a good material to better structure your program. One thing that stuck with us was the fact that a lot of things can be structured and done through just proper baselining, right? It can be just a good compliance-driven approach where you will go through the basics. Let's go, for instance, over something like the MFA. In 2025, we should not even debate the need of MFA, right, Josh?
Yeah, exactly.
And this is one of the core ideas, is that a lot of cybersecurity concerns can be covered with just smart compliance management. You should not be lost neither on the paperwork, but just choose one of the top 5 standards out there. It could be ISO, it could be NIST, it could be CIS. Those are great materials done by brilliant people on their respective fields. So don't reinvent the wheel, just pick one of them and use it as your baseline. And this is the core idea of the very first layer of the EBIOS RM. Then the second one will be regarding your industry, and more accurately, the fact that depending on the region or depending on the kind of activities that you have, you need to comply with some standards. It could be something as basic as the GDPR in Europe regarding personal data protection, could be something equivalent in the US or somewhere else in the world, or could be something very specific to your industry, let's say PCI DSS if you're working in financial or banking. It could be DORA if you're doing such thing, but you have a branch or activity in Europe, and so on and so on. By going through those compliance-driven approach, you kind of cover some of those basics, and then you end up with risk management, and you start doing some scenario-driven approach. And this makes it more relevant because all the basics are already covered with compliance. So whenever you're talking about risks, you're talking about the ones that are not covered by those basics. And this makes your communication more fluent and more efficient. I'm going to stop here regarding the BSRM kind of teasing. And again, I highly recommend that you check it out. It gives you a good overview about the pragmatic approach to structure your program, even if you're not intending to use it per se. So on CISO Assistant now, there are multiple modules that will help you get there. And as we saw last time, we have capabilities around asset management. We have capabilities around BIAs, around audits and compliance management, including third parties. And then you can go to the actual risk modeling or threat modeling and capturing those scenarios and run your risk management workflow on them. For the sake of clarity, we'll go with something basic as the asset management first, because without good understanding of your organizational structure and the dynamics that you have and interaction between business functions between each other and the associated processes and then the technical component that are supporting those business functions, you're most likely gonna maybe over-engineer things around cybersecurity or lack this kind of relevance regarding what you are actually trying to protect. Um, have you done any BIA or asset management before, Josh?
Yeah, I have, and I think it's pretty critical because you can't protect what you don't know you have, right? So asset management is all oftentimes overlooked, but it's very critical, and it's a building block of other parts of the process.
Absolutely. I couldn't say any better. And when we switched to the application, remember last time that we defined the organization around domains and parameters. Now we will start with the first module around asset management. Basically, when you're in this view, you can start adding your assets, view them or export them. And one common question that we always have is what happens if I already have a bunch of assets that I already identified? That's one question. That we have multiple channels actually to do that. You can start with the manual approach and inputting them one by one. You could go through the API and link it to whatever data source that you have. You could go with the integration layer, the N8N, for instance, or something equivalent. Or you could go, if you're on the Pro plan, with the data wizard. That is quite handy, where you're going to just drag and drop an Excel sheet and it will digest those assets into the application. So you have multiple channels to bring the existing information to the platform. Now, let's look at the data structure that you will need to have on the assets. Basically, you're going to always find this pattern around name, description, reference ID all over the application. And the first thing that you will need to maybe think about is what is the class of the asset. And if I'm going to pause on this one, this is also another common question regarding our users is what does it even mean an asset, right? It sounds so obvious, but it's not that obvious when we try and actually to capture them. Most people actually tends to have this kind of infrastructure bias regarding the
Yeah.
fact that assets are servers or VMs or even containers, or it's maybe a database. And those are actual assets, right? But the very first thing that you need to consider is maybe go with something as the ISO definition is that asset is anything that is relevant for your organization and create value and worth protecting. And with that definition, it could be something as a business function, because this is like the reason of existence of your company is maybe you need to generate revenue, maybe you have a social mission to protect some maybe some government institution and so on. Those are the core functions that need to be identified, and those actually are your first assets. Something usually referred to as primary asset if we're speaking the ISO vocabulary. But you don't need to be ISO experts to get a good feeling about that. You have some core functions within your company, and those core functions will be supported by some form of processes, and those processes or those capabilities will be supported again by some technical components. For instance, an example could be order to cash as a general process that could be supported by an e-commerce platform, and that e-commerce platform will be hosted on some VMs, public cloud, or so on. Let's focus now on this on more details, and you can see that we picked multiple classes here, and those classes are based on the classes identified by the CIS. They have great materials that, again, I recommend that you check them out. And this just helps you kind of think about, have I thought about facilities? Have I thought about devices? Have I thought about business processes? And this discussion is quite useful because it pushes you to be pragmatic and to ask the right questions and pull the information from your colleagues, specifically those who are more business driven and way far from in IT activities. And the whole idea is to reach out and try to get better understanding of what they are doing and how they're doing it. But most of all, what is the chain of dependencies that you're going to have there? And by doing that, you're actually getting a better understanding. Like Josh mentioned, you cannot protect things that you don't know or don't understand. You sometimes, and quite often actually, you end up discovering some nice surprises that this application actually depends on that server, or on that maybe it's hosted in public cloud and you didn't even know that, right? And you start learning about those dependencies. So this is something that you will always need to capture, and you can capture when you're working. And notice that we also support the upstream dependencies or downstreams, as if you are capturing an asset and this asset is a dependency of something else, you can put that information. Or if you wanted to have all the assets that are dependent on the one that you're currently inputting, you can do that as well.
I I think it's a great way that you all did it like this, in terms of adding dependencies and stuff, because as you said, it helps you identify different risks that you might not be able even be thinking about initially. Because I know a lot of um, other platforms or people in general, they just, as you mentioned, they consider assets as physical, tangible things, right? So you're not always thinking about the business process behind it. And I think you all even went a step further here by showing the dependencies, because this actually broadens your viewpoint and your knowledge, because it really lets you think about the entire process holistically, in other words. So I think it's a great job that you all added dependencies. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, the motivation was to be as thorough as possible. But then again, to be fair, it could become counterproductive, right? If you're trying to be as comprehensive and as thorough as possible, you could lose yourself into details. And if you're going down to, let's say, the row of the database, maybe it's an overkill. So you should
Right.
always keep a good compromise about what I'm trying to model, what I'm trying to achieve afterwards. If you
Right.
always keep in mind some kind of outcome driven approach, you will be just fine. Here, I'm just trying to remind everyone that what matters is the outcome of the analysis, and the outcome should be a good modeling of your business processes, how they're related to your technical components. If there are some critical functions that people are not aware of, or dependencies that people are not aware of, let's capture them, because they're going to help us all over the platform. And with that being said, other extra capabilities that are worth mentioning, I'm not going to comment everything, but I'm going to just highlight those two, is that a lot of people like to have those kind of attributes over their assets. The attributes could be around CIA or CIT or CIP attribute, simply around confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Or you can go a bit further and capture more information, and those scales are customizable. A lot of people in North America go with the FIPS. I think there's one, maybe FIPS 199 or something, if I'm not mistaken, that gives like those three levels. Other organizations prefer to have more depth on the levels, and this part is customizable through the settings. So sometimes you want also, as you discuss and model those information with your colleagues, to capture any sensitivity of the assets around those dimensions right away. Obviously, you can recover those information later on. And the other important aspect is it's not only about those security dimensions, it's also about the more specifically, if I zoom in, so to speak, on the availability part, it's around RTO, RPO, that are the critical information to know around your asset. Essentially, recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives around how long can we tolerate downtime up to a even graceful recovery, or what is the depth of the backup that we need to have. Those are critical informations to capture, and we will find some nice tool to get them within assisted mode. And the last thing is that, as you'll see it on the platform, is we kind of push this idea of links between objects, and you can even capture them like right now. If you maybe pull in some metadata from an external system, you can have that. You can link to internal objects on the platform as well. And you have those tagging systems that can help you have an extra dimension if you're up to that on your assets. The last thing that I want to mention here is that since we went with this kind of ISO inspired approach, notice that we made this types. It's either primary or supporting, just to help with one cool feature is the fact that when I'm primary, notice that I'm capturing targets here. And when I'm supporting, I'm capturing capabilities. And this is a pragmatic way of thinking about the dynamic that you're going to have between business functions and technical components. To put it simply, the business functions will kind of give you an orientation or expectation, so to speak, through the objectives. As maybe a platform doing e-commerce, expected to have maybe 99.9% availability over 30 days, something like that, right? Or I'm expected to host critical data, or I'm expected to have high level of integrity because I'm managing some health data or something. Business will give you expectations, but on the technical side, you're going to give capabilities. And the cool part is the application is actually can align or check for alignment between those terms, what the business is expecting and what our technical components are send them or providing to them. And this is how you're going to manage this through capabilities. Supporting gives you capabilities, and primary gives you expectations, and you will see that the application run some graph modeling behind the curtain to propagate those informations and get them on your behalf. Once you capture that, obviously you can go back and enrich the information and track your dependencies and so on. And the app will also gives you this capability of visualizing your interaction between the modules. It also capture the depth or the relationship between the domains, but if it becomes too cumbersome, just disable that so that you can focus on a simple chain of dependencies between those components. So feel free to juggle between the visual mode and the input mode so that you get this more 2D overview that is quite handy sometimes to follow through the dependencies.
I have a question for you, Abda. I know CISO Assistant, from what I'm seeing, it does a great job of capturing multiple data points in terms of asset management, right? Say an organization is just starting, with the tool. They want to start using CISO Assistant for GRC, but they don't want to necessarily be overloaded with information, right?
Correct.
What is a good baseline they could probably focus on in terms of adding, an asset?
It's an excellent point. One thing that I recommend is basically have those kind of workshops with their business peers just to understand what are the core functions, and usually start with something like 10 to 20 critical assets and just be as macro as possible. let's say again, go in with something as an e-commerce platform supported by an hypervisor and hosting a VM and the database. Just stick to something as simple as that, because
Mhm.
it's gonna be maybe not accurate. It could lack some depth, but it's a good starting point because this is how a human brain works. It's easier for us to criticize something and improve it as
Right.
start from scratch. So once you get started with something as basic as just your core business functions and the core technical components as macro systems, it's going to be good enough to start with. At some point you will get to the point where you feel that you lack some depth, and then you can iterate and improve details. But your point actually is pretty valid regarding the fact that most small companies don't need that depth, and you could just start with maybe top, I would say maybe 10 to 20 critical assets is more than enough to get started with your journey.
Okay, great.
And once you have those assets, you can actually conduct some BIAs. BIAs is one of the underrated cybersecurity tools, but it's actually quite powerful if it's properly implemented. And the whole idea of BIA is basically what we just said regarding asset management. You need to understand what your assets are, and you need to understand what will be the breakpoints of each one of the assets and how will that translate into the ecosystem of the organization. How we're going to conduct that is that you can start some BIAs and you can have as many as you want. And within each BIA, you can pull and include some assets within that study. Again, as we mentioned with Josh, you could limit yourself to maybe to 5, 10, or up to 20, just the critical one, or even split them across multiple studies. And once you capture an asset, you might want to focus first on the technical controls or organizational controls that will help you with availability, because availability is the easiest things to discuss with business. It's not going to be always the easiest one to implement, right? But it's the most simple and most straightforward dimension to debate with business, because you can tell them like literally, guys, if we don't do this, we are out of business, or we have a downtime for X amount of time. So the discussion there is way smoother and more efficient because it's straight to the business, and it will translate to loss of income and so on. That's why I will encourage you to focus on the availability first and just identify what are the controls that are missing. Maybe it could be something around the backup. Maybe it could be something around the redundancy. It could be something around some recovery procedures and so on and so on. So you can capture those assets, and on each one of the assets, if you want to go a bit further, you could go inside the asset and start discussing those breakpoints in case you feel some kind of resistance or people actually are not familiar with that vocabulary. And you just start capturing some point of time on which you can indicate. So what happens if we are out of business for 5 minutes? Is it that bad, or people will not even notice? What happens if it's like 2 hours? What happens if it's like 3 days? And what kind of impact I'm going to have based on my metrics? Or if I want, actually can have both. If I want to have it with the specific dimension, I could end up maybe just with issues about availability, but maybe in some cases it could maybe pull the legal team because I signed some kind of agreement with some SLA and fines maybe I need to pay. Or it could even go a bit further, and it could be a concern on safety. Say, let's say that there's some electrical component required for the hospital, and they could maybe afford 2 3 days with some backup generators, but not beyond maybe 5 days or something. So yeah, you could go down that road and explore those extra dimensions just to get a better understanding of the impact. And the thing that I found most useful in this exercise of BIA is, beside this definition of controls, it gives you a good foundation with your colleagues that are maybe allergic to cybersecurity concerns or are resistant to that, or they don't see the relevance of financing maybe this control or that control. So when you pull the information around business and around availability, it just creates some smart bridges and a healthy one around common ground.
Yeah, I think as you said that, it helps translate, the real needs to business, the business has, because no one really cares about encryption or TLS or MFA. Just at the end of the day, business leaders just want to know how it impacts business, what financial losses are expected, and I think, something like this definitely brings across that point.
Exactly. And the app will help you navigate your dependencies, and see what are the breaking point. You can go back again to maybe you want to have like an exec level summary by generating the report. And the three key metrics that we picked and are most relevant for everyone are those three. Usually keep it simple, and you want to stick with those three binary information regarding the fact: have you documented your recovery procedures? Have you tested them? And are you meeting actually have you met the exact target that have been defined by your business? If you keep it as simple as this, you're going to have a strong foundation to go into more depth, into more details. For any related BIA activities, you need to concern yourself with something that we usually call the assume breach approach, where you just need to imagine that you're already pwned by some malicious actor and your system is down. So I need to always be ready to do the recovery. Am I ready to do that? Have I tested it? How periodically am I testing that? And am I able to honor the expectation that business have set? And if not, why? Do I need more budget, or am I not smart enough on the implementation, and so on and so on. So yeah, those three information will help you build kind of your health bar around the core concept of BIA. And there are extra components. I'm not gonna go into too much detail, but the application will help you go into more depth when you're ready to do that.
Abda, don't mean to put you on the spot, but would it be possible to see what an executive summary would look like
Sure.
from the BIA? Yeah.
Yeah. So you could go here, and basically the information that you will have for the exec summary are the asset that you captured.
Mm-hmm.
You need to identify those breakpoints, the summary of those three core metrics that we identified,
Right.
and the alignment. Remember when we talked about the alignment between
Yeah.
what are you expecting and versus the capabilities, and you will see all those weaknesses. If
Okay.
I picked any controls, let's say that for this one, I'm gonna associate this with specific controls, maybe this one, randomly picking one. It will also end up in the report, as it will
Mm-hmm.
tell you, by the way, we're expecting also those controls as part of this overview. And keep in mind
Okay.
that you can have as many BIA as you need.
Okay, great. And this report I saw could be exported as a PDF that you could probably
Exactly.
provide
Yeah.
to executive management. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So with this, you are getting a good foundation. And one fun fact, I don't know if it's fun for everyone, but a lot of people actually tends to kind of have like kind of allergy around PIAs because they feel that this is not an actual cybersecurity concern, which is just odd to me. Because literally wherever material you read, you find those CIA letters and you have the availability there, and they tend to say,
Mhm.
okay, this is like more production issue. We can leave it just to maybe the IT team or the run team or something like random like this. But it should be your first concern. And when
Yeah.
you are reaching, actually are getting interested into availability topics, this is how you're gonna build trust, and you build like engagement with the business to understand that cybersecurity is just an enabler for business, and it should be fit like that.
Yeah.
Right. Now that we covered the asset and business impacts, at least you have those basics for your controls, and the controls naturally will feed the applied controls part, and you can start with that. If we are moving a step further toward compliance, on the compliance, we can just start with some basics. For the compliance module, which is around audits, you will need some frameworks to run your audits. And the good thing that you will find here is that you have multiple frameworks that are already built in. So this is what we mentioned on the previous session as batteries included. And if something is missing, you can definitely have yours. There's some specific frameworks regarding some limitation on their copyrights that need some extra actions. So you'll find more instructions on the GitHub. But the good thing is that you have a lot of materials out there, depending on the region, depending on the industry, and depending on the languages, to have a good foundation for your baseline. For the sake of simplicity, I'm gonna go, I think I already loaded it. I think NIST CSF. Well, we have a lot of materials from NIST. Yeah, we have the CSF. I'm gonna also pick the ISO. Okay, cool. Right. And we have enough materials with this. I think we can go also with some advanced framework like the Siphon from Belgium, which is a good starting point as well. Okay, now I'm good. I'm gonna go to the compliance and head to the audit and start my first audit. Notice that the information that I need to provide are around the name and description and the perimeter. The perimeter is what I designed on the first part with the domains and perimeter split. Once I define parameters, I can pick one of the frameworks. Notice that this list is only mentioning what I've shortlisted and imported from the store, as you don't necessarily you need and use everything. So you can just pick the one that are relevant for your first point. So let's go with the nest. And I have some extra attributes that I can feed later on. Of course, I need a name. Let's go with baseline for my e-commerce platform. Let's go with something as basic like this. So once you're on it, notice that the framework has been pulled and created for you, and it will follow a tree structure depending on the framework that you are actually using. Everything is a tree on the implementation of frameworks, and within that tree you can structure like categories, subcategories, or chapters, sections, and so on and so on. One thing that you will find also interesting is that you have multiple way or multiple path to start your compliance journey. Some people prefer to stick to something more straightforward and go in item by item. So yeah, I can just unpack that tree structure and go to each one of the items. And to get my compliance result, I need to identify what are the controls, either existing or need to be created. So just a quick comment here. The result is the information or the most important information that you need to capture around compliance, partially none or already compliant, or probably it's not applicable. And the status is more a progress status for the auditor so that you can keep track of your work as an auditor, where you stopped on that journey. If you guys followed through the first session, we kind of insisted on this decoupling concept where the controls will be the key components that will be used all across the platform. And for this, we can go into maybe existing controls because I already have some of them. They could have been imported by Data Wizard with the API manually, or we could end up in a situation where I already kind of established a foundation thanks to the BIA, right? We just debated the fact that BIA could be a good starting point. Maybe I identified that I need some backups, I need some procedures, I need some redundancies and so on. So they could be already a good starting point to help me comply with some items. If not, I could just start creating ones And the cool thing is that everything that I'm going to create will feed that common bucket, so to speak, of my controls. For the controls, the information that are relevant are the name and the domains. That's essentially it to get started. But you could notice also that you have also some reference controls. So sometimes people get confused about what reference controls are about. Essentially, those are templates for your controls in case you don't want to reinvent the wheel or you just want to instantiate those controls on that specific domain. You can just use them and they will kind of feed the controls on your behalf. You don't need to use them all the time, but it's quite handy in case you don't want to reinvent the wheel, just to look at the typical reference control that you have there. And it's also worth mentioning that reference controls are already implemented as libraries, or you can even define yours. Once I create a specific, what this item is about is around the mission. So maybe I have, let me see if I have organization. Yeah, nice. I have the context for organization document. It's good. I could click on save and continue so that I stay on the item, or I can even add a specific item for this one. I can assign it. I can manage its progress. And there's so many other attributes that you can refer later on to enrich the data of that specific control. So again, for the sake of clarity, I'm going to repeat just those two core components. Applied control are the actual control that you're going to implement and follow their life cycle, and those are the items that are going to protect your organizations. And the reference controls are more templates that you could define or import so that you're not repeating yourself too much. And you could add as many as you see fit, or reuse as many as that you see fit, depending on the controls. As an illustration, I could just say, yeah, this is maybe partially compliant for now, and move on. Or I can just go here and say, hey, maybe I already input something. The one that is just done, I can just pick it again here, and we're good to go. And each time I'm doing this, I'm kind of defining my action plan to comply with that specific requirements. And by building those items, those controls, I could at some point just forget for a moment about the compliance and head to the operational side of things by clicking here, action plan, and notice that I'm kind of virtually flipping the page and I'm looking this time at the controls and not anymore on the requirements, and the application keep tracks of those relationships. This is going to be your bread and butter, where you're going to focus on implementing things and working with your colleagues around them, maybe adding more details, tracking the progress. And you can go back to your audit and synchronize yourself with one specific item. Let's say that, oh, by the way, this looks like already active. I can say that I'm already compliant. Or if you want to let the application do that on your behalf, you just click here to sync to actions. And this is a nice feature that we added to accelerate that workflow, where you could literally inherit the status of the controls and propagate them on your audit. So you decide when is the right time to synchronize your audits based on the progress of your implementations. And see, it just toggled the status on our behalf. So this way, you kind of keep your focus on the operational side of GRC by identifying what are your requirements, selecting the controls that you need to be implementing, or creating ones if they're missing, working with your colleagues, and just going back and answering the compliance or letting the application do that on your behalf. The other aspect of the compliance will be the formal ones. And I can, again, go back to my action plan and dive into each one of the items and start picking my evidences. And for evidences, you have multiple paths to achieve that. Either you can add an evidence from your file system. It could be on different system where you don't want to duplicate the information. Let's say that you already have some kind of repository. It could be SharePoint, it could be some form of some shared file system, whatever technology you're using there. And you could just reference links and you will go through the IAM of that component by doing that. Or
Quick question.
please.
Oh, sorry. Quick question, Abda. Could we utilize the same information in CISO Assistant to present to auditors? So let's just say we have a SOC 2 Type 2 audit coming up and we have external auditors. Can we use the same information that we are gathering here and
Absolutely.
present it to, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say that you're doing exactly what you just mentioned. You're going through a SOC 2. On the SOC 2, you're selecting the controls. And for the controls, you need to capture the document. Or the evidences could be the policies that you wrote down, or could
Mhm.
be some screenshots of the tools that you implemented, could be some register of awareness session, and so on and so on. Those items will be the evidences that you need to provide your auditors to get their approval. How we're going to do that is, like I said, you can capture the formats of different, there are multiple files are supported there. Or if you want to just have a quick shortcut, it could be directly from your clipboard. Some evidence 1, 2, 3. I'm just going here. And notice here that I'm not even going through my file system. I'm picking it up directly
That's great. Yeah,
from the clipboard.
that's pretty
So,
nice.
yeah, and that can be a huge time saver, while keeping in mind that even for your evidences, you can automate their lifecycle. If we go here, notice that I can manage multiple revisions of my evidence, and I can even set an expiry date so that this item will auto expire and send me warnings and send me reminders about the documents. And more specifically, I can assign them to some of my colleagues so that they can go over the items, and they each one will know that they're expected to refresh, so to speak, some evidences. By doing this, going back to your point, I think we went with this one. There are multiple ways of interacting with the auditor. The easiest one is granting them a reader access to your CISO Assistant instance. So this way, everything is interactive. They can just jump between items and see all the components that you built there.
Right.
Or if you don't know want to go that route, you have multiple exports. So you have exports, let me zoom a bit here, in different formats. The most interesting one are probably the Word format that is kind of build you this kind of exec level summary. Let's look at it. And this exec level summary is just picking those critical informations and leaving you sections to add your comments before sharing them with your auditor, and
Right.
even the status of the controls. So this is a good way of outputting data so that you can enrich it with your comments, so on. But my preferred approach is the zip export. It's probably unusual for such tools, but you'll get in a second why we've done this. It's for a simple reason that we actually built in an archive that is pretty autonomous, on which you will get all the analytics, the controls, but most of all, the evidences. And this
Right.
way, you are sending this literally this standalone archive with everything that you've done around the audit for the auditor without guaranteeing them any access. So yeah, you have choices either
Mhm.
by granting them reader access on that specific domains, or sending them a more exec level report, or giving them a standalone archive with all the materials that you collected there.
Yeah, I think that's pretty great because knowing that you could do your internal audits, save the evidences, and then present it instead
Exactly.
of duplicating work. It's definitely much more efficient doing it this way. Yeah.
Yeah, and you got it right. We kind of obsessed with this kind of productivity and reusability, and that's why we're
Right.
trying to make things sticking in one place and just create links around them. because once again, a lot of people get lost into those GRC concepts because they're thinking about them as modules instead of thinking about them as a system. If you're having a
Right.
systemic approach, you think, yeah, audit is related to controls, related to evidences, and then maybe we're gonna run in a revision of the audit. I should not start from scratch. So you need to keep in mind that you have a lot of interactions, and when you're trying to split into very sub modules, you end up losing data and exhausting yourself to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Speaking of the life cycle, some nice features are around the cloning. So you can say at some point, all right, this is my audit for this year. I'm gonna start fresh for the next one, but I don't want to start from scratch, right? So I could just clone one, and I can just go with it, and it will inherit everything I've done on the first one. Let's say 2026 is pretty soon. Revision, and that's it. It's gonna inherit my where I stopped on last year, but even further, it will pull all the links that I've done on the first revision, so that I'm
Oh,
literally
nice.
doing a carbon copy of my audit and
Right.
leaving it there and just continuing on the next one. One interesting thing to consider here is maybe you also want, when you're doing that, to just lock it so that you're not being overwhelmed with some changes, or people actually, you literally don't want them to change anything. I noticed that a lot of buttons just disappeared here.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're trying to change anything, yeah, I'm here on the, let's look at it here. Yeah. If you're trying to change anything here, you don't even get the access to do that.
Okay.
So this is quite handy so that you kind of protect yourself to say, yeah, I finished 2025. This is going to be used as reference. So let's move on to the next one.
Got
Speaking of
it.
which, the next thing that you'll be interested in is that maybe in 2026, you added something else. And on that something else, it could be that you complied with an extra item here. Let's just use it. But you want to kind of identify the gaps with the previous revisions, and you don't want to get lost into the analytics. So you just click here, compare to, and it will tell you what are the comparable audits with this one, because you could be interested into comparing yourself with the last year revisions, but it could be also interesting to compare two products or two divisions between each other if they're using the same baseline.
Okay.
So let's
So
just do that.
basically you could do a gap analysis by
Exactly.
comparing, right?
See, and they're just doing exactly that.
Okay. Great. And I just want to mention for the viewers of this video, this tool is actually free to use. There's a community edition. Is this the community edition you're
Yeah,
currently using right now, Abda?
I'm using only the community edition for the videos with you. Yeah,
All right, great. So yeah, if you're viewing this video, this is completely free to use, so you literally have no excuse. Just go and download it. I'll leave the links in the video description. But yeah, this is completely free to use in terms of what we're doing right now.
exactly. So the last thing maybe worth mentioning for this part is that sometimes you might lack time to go into details on each one of the items. You have multiple views that can accelerate that work. One of my favorite is the flash mode, because even if it's not accurate, it's quite handy in case you don't have enough time to engage with your colleagues and collect the informations. You can just go through the items pretty quickly. This is compliant, this is not applicable, this is partially compliant, and so on and so on. And it helps you capture, so to speak, a first level of your assessment that can guide you to understand some weaknesses or some trends, or even put aside any non-applicable items on your specific parameters just to focus on what matters. So you can definitely just go with different views like the flash mode or the table mode if you rather stick with something more list-driven approach. So different angles, ending up in some situation, depending on the comfort zone that you have, your UI preferences, but most of all, the time that you can afford for specific sections. This one, usually when I'm doing some engagement with some customers that they don't have enough time to guide me through their organization, I need to help them as a consultant. I just go very quickly, and then I will have dedicated sessions with people on their respective items. Last thing here is that as we saw for the action plan, you can also virtually flip the page and focus on the evidences this time. And this is going to be handy for the auditors who don't want to review the controls, but to review the specifically each one of the evidences or the documents that have been collected. And you'll notice that the application will navigate again that graph and gives you the relationships between the evidences that you're reviewing and their impact on specific requirements. Right. I think that we're good at this point. There are so many layers and so many parts that we can explore. For the sake of simplicity, this is a good starting point on the audit. And next time, we will dive into third parties and risk management.
Okay, sounds good. And again, I want to thank you again, Abda, for taking the time to come on the channel and just share what CISO Assistant is about and how you could use it in your organization, whether you're just getting into GRC or you're a much more mature organization. It has a use case for any type of organization. And as we mentioned earlier, this is the community edition. Abda has been demoing in the video, so this is actually free to use, so you have no excuse. It's literally free to use. You could spin it up in your own VM, your own environment, and utilize it today. And just kind of going over what we did today, we discussed asset management. We also discussed BIA, as well as the compliant aspect of CISO Assistant. And Abda has made himself available if there's any other parts of the platform that you want us to kind of do a more deep dive in, just please let us know in the comment section below, and we'll be more than happy to make that happen for you. Again, this brings us to the end of the video. Thanks again, Abda, for joining us, and looking forward to have you back for some more sessions. For you, the viewers, if you haven't subscribed already, consider subscribing to the channel, and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for viewing. Take care.
Thanks, Josh, for having me, and until next time. Bye.
Bye.